Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me in Gasho. Hard is it to be born into human life. Now we are living it. Difficult is it to hear the teachings of the Buddha, yet now we hear it. If we will not awaken to the truth in this life, then in what life will we awaken to it? Let us reverently take guidance from the three treasures of the truth. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. I hope everyone is doing well out there and that you guys are staying safe during this difficult time. The words that I've just spoken are, of course, going to be the words from the three treasures, the Buddha, the Dharma, and, of course, the Sangha. And this is a teaching that is, of course, essential to our understanding of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism and also Buddhism as a whole, and one of the oldest teachings. And especially that first line, hard is it to be born into human life, is what I want to kind of focus on today. Now, usually when we talk about this, we're talking about the mandala wheel, right? The methods by which we are born out of samsara through a period of time. You can be born as a hungry ghost or an animal or a prideful god or something along those lines. But if you're very fortunate, if you're very lucky, you can be born as a human being. This is very unlikely and rare, though, because obviously you could be born as anything. Being only a human being is, of course, like one of like many, many different things. But the other thing that makes it very fortunate is because as a human being, you have the opportunity to hear the teachings of the Buddha, to say the Buddha's name, and of course to become a Buddha and be born into the Pure Land. So as a result of that, the opportunity to be born as a human being is an extraordinarily rare opportunity, and it is one that we should be incredibly grateful for because it doesn't come along that often. Not everyone gets the chance to be born as a human being. Some of them just keep cycling through different lives in terms of the teachings of like historical traditional Buddhism. So as I was thinking about this, of course, I kind of got into this concept of like, how difficult is it actually to be born as a human being? Not necessarily from like a cosmological level, but just in terms of like genetically speaking and historically speaking. So I did a lot of reading on this, and I found several different articles that were actually able to pull together some mathematicians and statisticians. So they actually did an attempt to determine how difficult it was to be born as a person in the first place. And some of the numbers are pretty interesting. So when we're talking about this, the difficulty isn't just like being born as a person. The difficulty is thinking about this in terms of understanding all the causes and conditions that allow a single person to be born. So not just like a human being, but you, the human being. You with the same sets of parents and family members. This you with the same belief systems and understandings of the world. All the causes and conditions that create you succinctly as an individual. So if you think about how difficult that is, there's a lot of different steps that these mathematicians tried to put numbers on. And I won't go over all the numbers, but I'll just explain some of the stuff that they tried to calculate. They tried to put numerical values on the likelihood that your two parents came together, whether the relationship was long, whether it was short, whether it was something that would likely result in a child or wasn't likely to result in a child. They added statistical variables to account for the fact that like there's lots of other different people around that could potentially like prevent your parents from coming together and creating a child. They also pointed out that there's different stages of life have an impact on whether a person is ready to have a kid. Or also, if you take it on a much more complicated level, from a biological standpoint, trying to understand the likelihood of individual person being born is almost statistically improbable or impossible to understand because just the right DNA combinations have to come together and they have to form a human being at just the right period of time. Otherwise, it's a different person standing in your shoes today. This is something that is almost impossible for us to truly put a number value on, but the statisticians tried to do that anyway. And then you have to consider, after coming to that enormous like pool of possibilities and probabilities, the fact that this has happened every generation previous to your existing. And this isn't just, you and your family that had to endure this. This is every family that leads to you. And if you think about this logically, that means your grandfather, your great-grandmother, your great-great-grandfather, your great-great-great-grandmother all had to have the same circumstances to come together and become the people that they were in order to have the children that they did so that you could be created. If your great-grandmother does not have the same grandmother, you don't exist. And so it's like a giant house of cards where if you take a single card out, the entire thing falls apart. And if you think about this, if every generation is like measured in approximately 20 years, which is actually kind of generous, and you go all the way back to Homo sapien time, like in terms of the first Homo sapiens, you're looking at, according to the statistician that did this math, 150,000 different generations where the numbers had to be perfect for that person to be born at just the right period of time. That's insane for me to think about. And the author of the article that I was referencing is a woman named Dr. Ali Benzir. And she, of course, put together all these different numbers. And she came to two different numbers. One is a very conservative estimate, which basically assumes that, like, yeah, there weren't as many human beings around, and these people were likely going to be in, like, smaller samples. So likely the genetic complexity was probably much more limited. And the smaller conservative estimate was 1 in 400 trillion. Which is a huge number. And then she took the more liberal estimate, added in a ton of the variables that are difficult for us to compute. And the larger number that she came up with was, dramatically, 1 in 400 quadrillion raised to the 150,000th power. And that is a number that is a 10 followed by 2,640,000 zeros. In other words, it is statistically impossible for it to come together. Dr. Benzir noted as an example, the probability of this second latter number becoming a reality is equatable to 2.5 million people getting together. This is the population of San Diego, and each of them playing a dice game at the same time. The dice that they're playing with is a single trillion-sided die. Now, in this comparable example, each one of these 2.5 million people throw their trillion-sided die at the exact same time, and they all come up with the same number. Say number 3. That's the probability of you being born. Now, I'm bad at math, and I can't tell you which number is correct, whether it's the smaller one or the bigger number, but I can tell you that in all certainty, the likelihood that you are here today to hear this message, to put your hands together in Gashul, and to say the Buddha's name is miraculous. It is beyond calculation. If you designed a simulation that repeated the steps of your genealogy trillions and trillions and trillions of times, you would not come to the same conclusion. You would not be sitting here right now. The causes and conditions that have allowed you to be born are unfathomable. And just trying to reflect on them, it's hard not to feel a sense of awe, of shock, but also gratitude for the fact that the dice rolled your way 150,000 different times. And on top of that, it is in this lifetime that you have the opportunity to hear the teachings of the Buddha, to learn from them, to let them impact your life, both in the good and the bad times. It can be extremely difficult for us to hear the teachings of the Buddha when we're in quarantine, when we're removed from our friends, our sangha, our temple, and our family. We sometimes have to work really hard to look for the teachings, especially when we are surrounded by suffering and when family members and, our professional lives might be struggling a little bit during this stretch. But, it's important to keep in perspective that we've already overcome impossible odds by just being here. Now, when you think of the combinations of the friends and family that you have around you, the chances that your life would look like it does right now is really something that defies all logical probability. It's something that really all the luck in the world could never purchase, could never afford you. And this is something to be grateful for, even in the worst of times. And so when I say it is hard to be born into human life, we're living it. And when I say it's difficult to hear the teachings of the Buddha Dharma, we do have a chance to hear it. And that's not nothing, right? And whether it means transgressing the realms of samsara, or whether it means surviving through difficult times and your ancestors piecing together some of the most challenging experiences in all of human history. Our being here today is the result of luck, chance, fate, causes and conditions that we really can't totally wrap our minds around. And so the only real thing that we can do is just put our hands together in gratitude for the chance, the opportunity to be here. And eventually, one day we'll be able to be together to do these sorts of things. And, that'll be a gift. But our just being here at all is also a gift. Thank you for listening. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namam Daps, Namam Daps, Namam.